China has been quietly preparing 5 steps to dismantle dollar dominance, and America hasn't even realized it's happening. And if you knew that the dollar, which still appears strong on the surface, has actually begun cracking from within, central banks around the world are quietly reducing their dollar reserves without any official announcement, because China has already built a complete parallel financial infrastructure. From the CIPS payment system processing transactions worth 245 trillion per year to the digital yuan, which now has 2.25 billion wallets worldwide, and what's even more surprising, Southeast Asian and developing nations have already begun to be drawn into this tide of change without many realizing it. So will the dollar truly fall, and will the world have an entirely new financial system within the next 10 years? Everything will be covered in this video, so stay with us until the end. The dollar still looks strong, still everywhere, still the currency used to buy oil, settle debts between nations, store foreign reserves. But there is data that mainstream media almost never reports, and this data is what keeps me up at night. The dollar's share of global foreign reserves has fallen from 73% in 2001 to around 54% in 2025. Nearly a fifth of its dominance has already vanished in 2 decades. And what makes this even more concerning, the pace of decline is accelerating. Central banks around the world are quietly diversifying their reserves. No major announcements, no press conferences, just slowly, month by month, reducing dollar holdings and adding other assets, gold, yuan, or other currencies. And this raises the big question: why is this happening now? Why not 10 or 20 years ago? The answer lies in one moment that changed everything. February 2022, when America and its allies froze 300 billion of Russia's foreign reserves as sanctions over the invasion of Ukraine. Within days, the world witnessed something that had never happened before. The dollar, long considered the safest asset on earth, could suddenly be weaponized. And that message reached every corner of the world. If Russia's dollar reserves could be frozen, anyone's dollar reserves could be frozen. Suddenly, holding dollars was no longer purely an economic decision. It became a question of geopolitical risk. This is where the quiet movement began. And behind all of this, one country had been preparing everything far in advance. One country that had quietly built a complete alternative infrastructure and is now simply waiting for the right moment to deploy it. A fact that leaves me shaking my head. China itself has already shifted its dollar reserves from 40% in 2010 to less than 1% in 2025. No major announcement, no press conference. They simply and quietly moved their assets over 15 years. And while America was consumed by its internal political drama, China had already finished building its own exit. Before we get into China's 5 most surprising steps, we first need to understand what China has actually been building all these years, because this is what genuinely stunned me when I first researched this topic. China isn't just talking about de-dollarization. They are actually building the infrastructure, brick by brick, system by system. I'll admit, I used to underestimate this. I thought it was just standard geopolitical rhetoric, but it turns out to be far more serious than that. The first and most fundamental piece is CIPS, the cross-border interbank payment system, China's version of SWIFT, a system that enables financial transactions between nations without touching the dollar, without passing through infrastructure controlled by America. And the scale is staggering. In 2025, CIPS processed transactions worth 245 trillion denominated in yuan. This is no small project. This is real, functioning global financial infrastructure. By 2024, more than 1,467 financial institutions from 111 countries were already connected to CIPS. Its reach extends to more than 4,200 banks across 182 countries. The second piece, the cracking of the petrodollar. This is the most dramatic development, the petrodollar system. The agreement that global oil must be paid for in dollars. has been one of the strongest foundations of dollar dominance since 1973. But that foundation is now beginning to crack. Saudi Arabia, America's most strategic Middle Eastern ally, has already begun accepting yuan for some of its oil transactions. India is buying Russian oil with rupees, later converted to dirhams or yuan. Even a French company has transacted gas with China in yuan. The first time an EU nation has done this. The third piece, systematic gold accumulation. Global central banks are buying gold in record quantities. 363 tonnes en 2025. Guy projected at 755 tons in 2026. 95% of surveyed central banks stated they plan to increase their gold reserves, and China is at the very forefront of these purchases. This is no coincidence. This is strategy, and the 5 steps of its execution are far more surprising than you might expect. China is just talking about de-dollarization, but not actually doing it. The dollar is still safe. The old system is still solid. Step 1. Yuan internationalization through the Belt and Road Initiative. China has 140+ countries in its Belt and Road network, and nearly $1 trillion in infrastructure financing across those countries is denominated in yuan, meaning countries receiving loans from China must transact in yuan. Automatically, global demand for yuan rises. This is no accident. This is systematically engineered demand. By 2025, more than 54% of China's total foreign trade was already settled in yuan. In 2020, that figure was just 18%. Step 2. De-dollarization of energy trade across Asia and the Middle East. Energy is the most critical arena, because the dollar's strength has never been purely about America's economy. It's because almost all global oil and gas is paid for in dollars. China is striking at precisely that foundation. They built the Shanghai International Energy Exchange, the world's first oil futures market denominated in yuan, not dollars. Step 3. The digital yuan, the invisible weapon that bypasses the Western system. This is the most extraordinary and most underrated development. On 1st January 2026, without major headlines in Western media, China activated an interest-bearing feature on the digital yuan, meaning people who hold ECNY can now earn interest. This transforms the digital yuan from a simple digital currency into a direct competitor to bank accounts, and the scale is already alarming. As of November 2025, there are 2.25 billion digital yuan wallets. China only has 1.4 billion people, meaning its usage has already spread beyond its borders. Total transactions have reached 16.7 trillion yuan, larger than Canada's entire GDP. Step 4. BRICS as an anti-dollar economic bloc. BRICS now represents nearly 40% of global GDP based on purchasing power parity. And they are building mBridge, an intercentral bank payment system enabling instant transactions in each nation's own digital currency, without the dollar as intermediary. In 2024, 90% of Russia's trade within the BRICS bloc was already in local currencies. 97% of trade between SCO nations, covering China, India, Russia, Iran, Pakistan, was already using local currencies, not dollars. Step 5. Quiet gold accumulation to back a new system. This is the most strategic and least discussed step. China is building a network of gold vaults in strategic locations, building yuan-denominated commodity trading platforms with gold price benchmarks, and providing yuan loans backed by gold to developing nations seeking to break free from dollar dependency. While the dollar continues to be printed without real backing, China is quietly accumulating assets that cannot be frozen, cannot be sanctioned, and cannot be controlled by Washington. Now, the question most relevant to us in Southeast Asia and developing Asian nations: what does all of this mean for us? Let me be clear first. This is not just geopolitical drama between two distant superpowers. This directly touches the value of your currency, the price of imported goods, and the structure of your nation's debt. First and most concerning, developing nations with dollar-denominated debt are the most vulnerable. Many Southeast Asian countries carry foreign debt denominated in dollars. If the dollar strengthens due to global uncertainty, their debt burden automatically rises in local currency terms. But if the dollar weakens due to de-dollarization, and these countries are the first to feel the volatility, they are caught in the middle. No control over the dollar, yet no mature alternative system in place. Second, there is a significant opportunity that few have recognized. Southeast Asian nations that build trade relationships in local currencies earlier or adopt alternative payment systems like SIPs sooner stand to gain a competitive advantage. They can bypass the dollar conversion costs that have long been a hidden burden in every international transaction. India has already done this, buying Russian oil with rupees, later converted to dirhams or yuan. Thailand and Malaysia have already explored local currency settlement with China, and ASEAN already has the local currency transaction initiative, direct transactions between ASEAN currencies without first converting to dollars. Third, Southeast Asia's commodity exports could be significantly impacted. Southeast Asia is one of the world's largest commodity exporters. Palm oil, rubber, coal, nickel, copper. Almost all of these commodities are currently priced in dollars. If a new yuan-based or mixed currency system begins to dominate the pricing of these commodities could shift fundamentally. It could be an opportunity or a threat, so depending on how quickly nations in this region adapt. And finally, ordinary people will feel the impact through inflation and imported goods prices. Global financial system transitions never run smoothly. There are periods of volatility, periods of uncertainty, and it is usually ordinary people who feel the impact first. Through rising, imported goods prices, eroding savings, and increasingly palpable economic uncertainty. We've seen the data. We've broken down China's 5 steps. We've understood the implications for our region. Now the biggest question, what will the world look like in 10 years? I'll be honest, nobody can predict this with certainty. But based on the data available right now, 3 scenarios are most likely. Scenario 1, the dollar gradually weakens. The world becomes a multipolar currency system. This is the most probable scenario and the most data supported. The dollar doesn't die overnight, but its dominance keeps eroding. The world moves towards a system where the dollar, yuan, euro, and perhaps several regional currencies all play significant roles. No single king. Each region has its own dominant currency. This is similar to what happened with the pound sterling from the world's dominant currency, slowly becoming a regional currency over 30 years. Scenario 2, open US-China conflict accelerates the collapse of the old system. If geopolitical tensions keep escalating, increasingly brutal trade wars, confrontation in the Taiwan Strait, or increasingly aggressive sanctions, the de-dollarization process that would normally take decades could be compressed into just a few years. This is what happened with Russia. Within 2 years of the 2022 sanctions, Russia reduced the dollar from 41% to 18% of its total reserves. External pressure actually accelerated the transition. Scenario 3, a new system based on gold and digital currencies replaces everything. This is the most radical scenario but cannot be dismissed. If the digital yuan continues its global expansion, if mBridge successfully becomes an effective inter-central bank payment system, and if China's gold accumulation is large enough to back a new currency, we may witness the birth of a global financial system, completely different from anything we know today. But across all 3 scenarios, one thing is certain: the world will not look the same as it did 20 years ago. The system we assumed was permanent has proven it can change, and that change is already underway quietly, systematically, and faster than most people realize. So the question for you now, do you prefer a world still dominated by the dollar, with all its risks, or a new multipolar system, with all its uncertainty during the transition? There is no right or wrong answer, but this is a question I believe we all need to think about, because the answer will determine our economic decisions, our investment decisions, and even our nation's policies going forward. Drop your thoughts in the comments, share this video with people who need to know, and don't forget to subscribe, because there are still many big stories yet to be told. See you in the next one!